thank you all for coming once again. Due to the vagaries of scheduling, with the availabilities of our guests and so on and so forth, we'll be watching now, after having seen the first installment of the so-called Coca trilogy with Where's My Friend's House a few weeks ago, accompanied by the wonderful lecture by Gobag Rekatable. We'll be now shooting straight forward to the third installment of the trilogy, Through the Olive Trees from 1994, thereby skipping the second episode, variously known as And Life Goes On or Life and Nothing More. That will be featuring later, though, in the series. It will be the kind of capstone of the series, actually, later this year in July. We have to have a special guest presenting that. But our guest today will be presenting Through the Olive Trees, and she'll also be, I guess, giving us a little bridge from Where's the Friend's House to Through the Olive Trees via And Life Goes On. Our guest tonight is Ute Holl, Professor of Media and Aesthetics in the University of Basel, a position she has had since 2009. After teaching stints in Weimar, Berlin, and Köln. Ute is also a very prolific author, having published the books Kino, Trans und Kybernetik in 2002, Der Moses-Komplex, Politik der Töne, Politik der Bilder in 2014. As author, the second film being a monograph on the film Moses and Aaron, by Straub-Riet, a pair of filmmakers who actually have some very interesting resonances, let's say, with the work of Kiarostami. And as an editor, she was also responsible for Radiophonic Cultures in 2018, Oberflächen und Interfaces, Ästhetik und Politik filmischer Bilder, also from 2018. And then also together with former guest in the series, Matthias Wittmann, she edited the book Memoryscapes, Filmformen der Erinnerung. Ute Holl is also a filmmaker in her own right, together with her colleague Peter Ott. And they have been responsible for the recent films Traumwolken, Off Exil Nummer 1 bis 7, G20 Remix from 2017, and Die Amity from 2023. But right now I'd like you to all join me in giving Ute Holl a warm welcome up to the lectern. Thank you very much.
Okay, I need to watch the time because it's quite a marathon tonight for you. Thank you very much, Daniel Fairfax, and also Vincent Sedegar in absence for this invitation. And thank you very much, all of you, for coming here tonight. It is a great honor, of course, for me to be speaking here in a series where many great scholars of Iranian cinemas have spoken and are going to speak on the work of ABBAS Kiarostami. And I'm especially happy to be able to speak about the film Through the Olive Trees of 1994. It's a great honor, but I might be risking this honor too with my introductory talk, however, because the cinema of Kiarostami is intentionally incomplete, and this will be the first thing I will speak about. It is incomplete, ambivalent, and its interpretations are fiercely, one could say, controversial. This, however, was exactly Kiarostami's goal. Cinema, according to him, should leave space for more than one view or one perspective. In a conversation with Jean-Luc Nancy, Kiarostami said, and I quote, and you can read with me, I hope. I can't bear, he said, narrative cinema. I leave the theater immediately. The more it engages in storytelling, and the better it does it, the greater my resistance to it. The only way to envision a new cinema is to have more regard for the spectator's role. It's necessary to envision an unfinished and incomplete cinema so that the spectator can intervene and fill in the voids, the lacks. End of quote. Accordingly, the aim of my introduction tonight must be that each and every one of you gathered here in the theatre tonight sees a different film once we get to the screening. Concepts of incomplete cinema. To introduce the film, then, I will refrain from summarizing or interpreting the film. Nevertheless, I feel there are aspects of the film Through the Olive Trees that might need a bit of contextualizing, and I will do my best to provide references in due brevity here. I will start just to give you an overview so you can know where we are and how long this is going to take still. I will start with giving a bit of contextualization to the so-called Coker trilogy, films that deeply interlace. Through the Olive Trees is the third part, as Danny said already, of that trilogy. Then I'll be talking about filmic forms, and my aim is here to show how Kiarostami achieves the alleged openness of his films and to discover how he hopes to create voids, lacks, and fissures in his stories so that you or we, as a sovereign audience of the cinemas, may fill in with our own experiences, judgments, visions, and doubts, and to find our own ideas and preconceptions critically reflected in the film. So it's about changing your mind in the cinema. To do so, I will draw your attention to three aspects, so just that you know. The first is the politics of memory or counter-memory and remembering in Kiarostami's films. And this concern is quite obvious since, as Daniel said already, I published a book together with Matthias Wittmann, whom you might have heard in December, I think. He gave an introductory talk. Our book was called Counter Memories of Iranian Cinema, and we worked together with people from Iran and also from the diaspora. Then I will point out some of Kiarostami's strategies of reframing realities, I called it. In his films, Kiarostami systematically confuses the concepts of the real and the fictitious, intentionally blurring boundaries between documentary forms on the one hand and the staged and scripted strategies of feature films. Kiarostami does so extensively in today's film Through the Olive Trees. And the third issue I would like to address is less obvious. It concerns the question if, in all its incompleteness and alleged openness, the cinema of Abbas Kiarostami really allows for a feminist perspective, a feminist view or gaze. So while pleading for radical openness, Kiarostami's films seem to focus on male roles, male problems, male life crises, while female actresses are only peppering the plot from the margins. So this will be the last part, where is the feminist's view? Let us discuss then if this is possible at all to watch the film, or we should discuss then if it is possible at all to watch the films against the grain of a patriarchal attitude. Fortunately then, Daniel and the organizers of today have allowed for a controversial conversation after the screening. It's going to be a long night, I heard. And this might be something to discuss, I think. How queer, how post-colonial is the cinema of Kiarostami? And exactly the recent book of Hamid Dabashi is actually called Abbas Kiarostami Towards a Post-Colonial Film Philosophy. So that's the assumption Dabashi has. And just to mention it strangely, the German translation of the film's title is Quer, durch den Olivenhain, implying a certain mode of resistance, protest, or at least misfitting, which is actually not implied in the English or the Farsi titles, and only very slightly in the French version, which is called Au travers les oliviers. So there's a bit of cross traffic intended. It would be interesting to see how the titles themselves make for a different attitude of the spectators. You can interrupt me anytime if there are questions. It's no it's not a problem. The coca complex. It's perfectly possible, I think, to follow the film through the olive trees as a singular film. But in order to recognize some of its twists and turns, it might be helpful to situate it as a part of the so-called Coca trilogy, sometimes also called Rostamamba trilogy, shot in that region between 1987 and 1994. Fortunately, the past screening in this series was exactly of Kiarostami's film Where's the Friend's House? Khoneyi Dost Kojast. And this is the poster for it. And fortunately, and very fortunately, it was introduced by our esteemed colleague Golberg Rekaptalay. Golberg has probably already explained the context of the trilogy, whose second part then is called And Life Goes On, or Nothing But Life, in Farsi, and please excuse my pronunciation here, is Zendegi va digar hit. So it actually means life and nothing more, but we can also take it as life goes on. Hamid Dabashi, it was already announced, will introduce that film in June of this year. From the poster of the film, you can already infer how the films are connected. So we have the poster of the first film as part of a poster of the second one, and how the second film evokes, in a way, the memory of the first one. In fact, all three films interlace. This is first and foremost achieved by keeping the same actors involved. Most of them non-professionals, villagers. You've seen it in the last film, Where's the Friend's House? However, as in a documentary film, as in real life, these actors, as we all do, age. And sometimes they are replaced, sometimes under the same name, and sometimes a different one. So please, and I just remind you of the face of this boy, so please keep the face of this boy in mind for today's screening. His real name, by the way, is Babak Ahmadpour, who plays the film's protagonist called Ahmad Ahmadpour, trying to trace his friend, played by an actor called Ahmed Ahmadpour, probably Babak's brother. The friend's name in the film is Mohammed Reza, you'll remember him, and Ahmad runs all over the place to find his house. These strategies of names and naming is already a first method of systematically confusing realities and fiction, and it will also play a role in the film Under the Olive Trees. The second film then, And Life Goes On, or however you want to translate it, deals with a catastrophe, and this catastrophe will also remain the frame of reference for today's film, so that's why I'll explain a little. In 1990, an immense earthquake hit northern Iran. Some of you will remember, exactly in the region where the first film of the trilogy Where's the Friend's House was shot, and where, by the way, Kiarostami was born in 1940. The last two films of the trilogy then deal with this issue. The issue that it is impossible to deal with forms of realities like this, let alone to deal with the real at all. The earthquake in the Coca region caused between 35,000 or 50,000 deaths. And already I feel that range of indeterminacy is in itself inconceivable. How to think of about 15,000 people namelessly vanishing in the fogs of statistics. In addition, an estimated number of between 60,000 and 100,000 people were seriously injured. Both the second and the third part of the trilogy, so today's Under the Olive Tree 2, are concerned with the impossibility of understanding, let alone communicate an inconceivable event such as this one. So it's about Unvorstellbarkeit, one would say in German. It was traumatic for many thousands who lost their friends and families. Traumatic means in psychoanalytic terms that there was no way for them to represent the event and its violence, neither in personal nor in collective or cultural memories. And this is where Kiarostami comes in with his film project. He raises exactly the question if there was, at all, a way of visualizing, sonifying, materializing the inconceivable. His films are, in this sense, a matter of death and of life. Today's film, Under the Olive Trees, however, provides another turn of the screw in the representation cycle I'm hinting at. For the hero of Through the Olive Trees, Hossein, the earthquake is not just a disaster, but also a very strange form of liberation, at least a very ambivalent experience, as you will see in a while. In a second film, Zendegi va digar hiç, and Life Goes On, which Hamid Damashi will be talking about in June, Kiarostami focuses on the distribution of horrendous news through television, its channels and networks of global broadcasting, which are of course today challenged or replaced by global streaming platforms, which today form our experiences. Television in this film about life, Zendegi, is shown as a medium of forgetting, of denial, or of neutralizing life. So it's very much against the work of television images that this film is directed. In fact, our colleague Marianne Dohn has argued, also in 1990, so in the exact year of that huge earthquake, in the same way, she defined television as a vampiristic medium that feeds on the endless and relentless continuity of a stream of news. Today as data, of course, that is accelerated by the rhythm of catastrophes. So for her, in her argument, the catastrophes are there to exactly keep us on the monitors of, at that time, the television, today, the monitors of our computers. The film Life and Nothing More is questioning television as a medium. I'm sure I will not spoil Damashi's coming talk if I mention this here, and you will probably have forgotten it by June anyway, or drowned it in the excitement of the coming Soccer World Cup. In the film, And Life Goes On, the actor who plays the film director asks a young man who is busy installing an antenna on the side of the road just across the emergency tents of the refugees of the earthquake if he thought it proper to watch a soccer game in times of mourning. The young man answers, "To tell you the truth, I am also in mourning. I have lost my sister and 3 cousins. But what can we do? The World Cup takes place every 4 years. We can't miss it. Life goes on." And that is where the title stems from. And this is also the attitude we are all busy adapting right now. While we are watching wars and destruction in close-ups, life goes on. This can be intended as a moral criticism towards voyeuristic attitudes on world crisis. This is the one side to look at it. But it could also point towards the possibilities of participation in life. Since life goes on, the power of streaming services that feed us on images of ruins and rubble, or mutilated and starving people, is not almighty. So those are the 2 takes that are possible. Either we become voyeuristic or we see life goes on and we can act differently. We do not need to go to the monitors. We do not have to turn into the sad vampires that Marianne Dohn predicted us to be. In this sense, I feel that Kiarostami's quest to explore the options of how inconceivable and unimaginable events could be visualized and communicated has recently become even more important and more urgent than they were in 1994. But we can talk about that in a discussion afterwards. In the face of this, of our media vampiristic crisis or impotence, then, Kiarostami turns towards the cinema itself as a space of communication that is open, and I quote him again, unfinished and incomplete. In cinema, with his films, I argue, he aims to engage the spectator and redistribute the responsibilities of perceiving and relying on one's own senses. So cinema for him is the place where we learn to be sovereign spectators. We are all responsible for the way in which violence and trauma, that of others always, can be talked about, communicated. Cinema, for Kiarostami, is thought of as a remedy against the streaming of news in the networks. So what then are the filmic forms that Kiarostami is experimenting with? The first one is the politics of counter-memory, and I'll have to be short here, although we've discussed a lot with Matthias on that. In the third film of the Coca trilogy, then, Through the Olive Trees, cinema itself is examined as a means of producing and reconfiguring memory and remembering. At the same time, cinema is not presented as being more authentic or more real than other media. On the contrary, Kiarostami actually shows it to be more treacherous and even more boring. In pointing to the means of describing the catastrophe, Kiarostami, together with his protagonist Hossein, points to the fact that memories are a social construction. They are not memories of something that happened, but they are produced. Of course, we never know in this film with Hossein what are his own thoughts, you'll see it just now, and what has been scripted and predicted. However, he insists, Hossein, that even the making of memories is a matter of power and, as he says, class relations. This actually was and is, I think, the real political provocation of the film. Memories are biased, memories are not collective or cultural. In Through the Olive Trees, the impact of cinema itself on the construction of memory is at stake. Here, Kiarostami's film absolutely agrees with Chris Marquet's female narrator in Sans Soleil, who you know, who reads from the letters of a fictitious cameraman called Sandor Krasner, and we have with Marquet that same confusion of names of real people and false names of real people and back and forth. And I quote the narrator. I've written it for you. He wrote to me, "We do not remember, we rewrite memory, much as history is rewritten." What makes Through the Olive Trees such an interesting, and actually, in spite of the disaster and misery implied, actually an entertaining film to watch, that the protagonists try to shape and change each other's memory during the film, and that is impose their will and thus their futures on others. This also includes the director of the film in the film, who is determined to mold and shape people according to his own image. So I'll explain that later on. There are several directors involved, and one is very old-fashioned, trying to sort of mold people's views and memories according to his ideas. The director Kiarostami, on the other hand, is also present in that film as a positive mirror image of the enacted director, in that he opts for openness and an incomplete cinema. But is that really that simple? As Jean-Luc Nancy again underlines in his essay on the Coca trilogy, The Evidence of Film, the filmmaker's attention towards bodies of the actors and actresses, so the filmmaker's Kiarostami's attention towards bodies and actors, their movements, as you will see, and their voices, as you will hear, and even their thirst and their need to urinate, this is the observation of Nancy, counters conventional models of what historical facts are composed of. Cinema's memory is physiologically based. So we could talk about that a lot. We might do it in the discussion afterwards. But the concept of history in the films of Kiarostami is not one of data and of events, but inserting the physiological memory, the physiological being. And I'm very happy that Heide Schlüppmann is here because it very much echoes and resonates with her studies on Nietzsche and the cinema. So while Kiarostami tries to impose his view on us through films, he at the same time wants us to negotiate the issue of imposing and impostures. We are persuaded to understand that these impositions are bound to fail. One cannot be, as they used to say in the mass media, manipulated by the cinema. We have to come to think ourselves. We are persuaded to understand that these impositions are bound to fail. We do not simply accept someone else's attitudes. Life is different, and it is in cinema. It is the cinema itself that makes these differences. Such is the argument. Part 3 of the Coca trilogy, Through the Olive Trees, is an exercise in making differences, not only in cinema, but also in real life. At this point, I would like to show 3 film sequences. One of Life and Nothing More, because I want to make sure that you understand the interlacing of the films. In Life Goes On, we see a fictitious film director, you'll see him just now, played by Farhad Karamanth, traveling to the Coca region in order to find the young protagonists of his former films. That is, where is the friend's house? So he's looking for Ahmad and Bakar to see if they are well, if they have survived, if he could help them. So the fictitious filmmaker, Kiarostami did that traveling themselves, but I think that will be explained in June. The fictitious filmmaker takes the son, and the camera follows them on their travels. Let's look at a short excerpt, and I hope this is going to work. Okay, I'll go on because I saw the time is getting tight. But what I want to show is that father and son are shown to travel in what seems at first a documentary mode of cinema, at least in terms of sound, as you heard, of lighting and of the camera. But the very precise shot and counter-shot editing reveals that all of these scenes were meticulously staged. In the second scene, which I need to show, father and son wander about in the ruins, talking to people to find the whereabouts of their 2 protagonists, Babak and Ahmad. Here they come across a young man who tells them of his marriage, which took place right after the earthquake. And unlike an unlikely story, we feel, but so far it is convincingly told. Again, the scene seems to proceed in a very documentary mode in the beginning. You'll have seen that, especially because the sound of the dialogues is quite poor and the shots are seemingly aimless and undecided. It's a very long and boring scene, cutting back and forth in those angles. But this, I showed it to you because it's the original scene of the film we are then going to see, which endlessly repeats exactly this one. But what was very confusing to the people is that in the middle of that documentary mode, you suddenly have music, extra-diegetic music. Of course, they do that in documentaries today, but it is not part of it, and it actually appeals to a fiction film mode. And then it wasn't, and this was a criticism at the time, it wasn't Persian music, but exactly Vivaldi's Concerto for 2 Horns. And that means that the film is not overtly and obviously drawing on feature film conventions, extra-diegetic mood music, but it bluntly tries to appeal to Western audiences, relentlessly, pulling them into the pleasure of a false and fake empathy. From then on, doubts about the authenticity of the sort of life that goes on in this film, Life Goes On, or rather the form of life that haunts this film, Life Goes On, starts to prevail. And let us now just quickly look at the scene as it is adapted in tonight's film through the olive trees, and you'll see there is nothing of that back and forth cutting there. I know I need to hurry, but I will.
خیلی خوب همونجا که هستی باش سلام علیکم
No, it's the same house. It is the same false director of the film Life and Nothing More, and now he is being...
Cut. آقا بگو جواب سلامشو بده سلام میکنه جوابشو بده کیسه رو بردار بیار پایین فراد جون وقتی که به سلام کرد یه نگاه بهش بکن بعد جواب سلامش بده
Okay, you'll see it later. I would have liked to show you more of that, but the important thing is we have 3 directors in the meantime. The false director of As Life Goes On. Then secondly, we have the director we didn't see in the film As Life Goes On, which is the veteran actor of Iranian cinema, Mohammed Ali Keshavas, who plays him. And he's surrounded by a very broad film team. You'll see it later. That we had not seen, of course, in the film As Life Goes On. And then finally, there is somewhere we suspect Kiarostami, who we don't get to see in the film through the olive trees, but we suspect that he must be there just as the other director had been there in the film before. And we assume his presence and suspiciously infer his instructions from every shot, move, or dialogue. We always think, where is he? What does he want? Now, as you will see, the film through the olive trees itself is an endless repetition of the staircase scene. Kiarostami is also pointing out to the fact that it is impossible to approach the last framing behind the last. So it is repeating that scene again. I'm jumping, that's why it's getting a little confused. But the idea is to sort of find what is the scene behind the scene, what is the truth behind the truth. And it's like a bit of those Russian puppets that it's being played in the film you're going to see just now. But Kiarostami is saying there is no original, there is no real which we can contract with the cinema. There is no last thing behind the last. The film Through the Olive Trees specifically begins to stammer and to stutter because it is symptomatically pointing towards the origin of all those repetitions and working throughs that are going to happen. That is, it points towards an excess of violence, an excess of injuries that cannot be endured or nor tolerated, not put into words or images. This is the idea. You cannot get hold of the violence that is at the core of all that storytelling. It points, one could say, this film towards an excess of violence without ever showing it, because traumatic violence is impossible to show. Perhaps sound is an option, as Kauter Ben-Hania's film The Voice of Hind Rajab has recently shown. We can discuss that later too. Besides these repetitions that you are going to see, there are also gaps and inconsistencies at work under the olive trees. Hossein, the happy bridegroom of the second Kolka film, And Life Goes On, who is also named Hossein in real life, or so we are told, will return in Under the Olive Trees that we will be watching tonight, but he is going to return as a strange revenant, taking revenge without God on the side of the earthquake. In his endless accusations, he rants not only against class relations in education or in property, but he will also deny the difference between a natural catastrophe and a social catastrophe. There is no difference. This is the argument of the film. They form two sides of the same coin and cannot simply be represented. Here, Kiarostami's concept of incomplete cinema steps in to prove that, in fact, they can become conceivable, the two sides of the coin. However, only in histories of gaps and lacks and cinematic histories that allow for an understanding of difference and even contradictory points of views. I will jump a little because we are running late and come to the last question. Let me even briefly address the disturbing issue of women in the films, and in this film specifically, who are powerful, even in that film that we are going to see now, but nevertheless, they remain strangely secondary as characters and also as agents in the films. In Through the Olive Trees, there is, first and foremost, you will see it, the female assistant director, played by Zarefe Shiva, who is always called Mrs. Shiva in the film. She's shown to be, or she is shown as being the actual director behind the back of the incapable director that we have just seen. Talking to people, making decisions, supervising the team, and all the while remaining in the background. Except, of course, for some shots of the camera who actually likes to take her into close-ups. And then there's Tahare, played by a girl called Tahare Ladanian, who seems to be a docile schoolgirl, but she will always get her will, even stubbornly, and she is well aware of everything she wants. But both have little to contribute to the negotiations of catastrophe, trauma, violence, and they remain within a sort of real life. This is very strange because that seems gender biased. Let us postpone to the discussion afterwards if this idea that the women stick to the life as such or life as goes on is a fetishization of the female as being beyond the theoretical negotiations of what is history, what is catastrophe, and what can we represent. Or maybe Kiarostami is in envy of those who are able to deal with life as such, with the environment, the surroundings, and in a way that we might call beauty, as the last shots of the film will suggest. I just want to add one thought before we move on. Today, the word zendegi is very familiar to us. We have heard it many times in conjunction with the slogan Zan, Zendegi, Azadi, woman, life and freedom, which was adapted from the Kurdish, which is similar. And you know that it came up and sparked the demonstrations after the violent death of Gina. You remember Mahsa Amini, the 20-year-old girl who died after having been arrested by the Islamic Guidance Patrol, the morality police, in 2022, allegedly for not wearing a hijab. And you know that she died under suspicious circumstances in police custody. I asked myself, and this is to end, while repeatedly hearing the word zendegi, if this did not, for Iranian audiences, contain more of a resistance than is present in Western translations. In the language, the slogan, we see the language as a slogan, as graffitos, the slogan as graffito on our walls all over the place. Mementos of a femicide, which is masked by political or of political reasons. Let us pay attention to the domestic microviolence that Kiarostami shows in the film we are going to see now. I'm not sure if that showing of microviolence and putting the men on the side of the political discussions is enough to redeem him of a patriarchal gaze. I'm looking forward to discussing that with you afterwards. Thank you.
Let's start with a question, or maybe just a prompt actually for you, because you obviously foreshadowed in the lecture this kind of feminist view that we could perceive in this film. I was wondering if we could talk a bit more about that now that we've been able to watch the film together and with this kind of thinking in mind, like, yeah, would you like to tell us more about that? How the feminist view works in this film?
Well, I think first of all, maybe it is difficult to talk about that film from a point of view. I chose to talk about it from a point of view of violence. I think it's very easy to talk about this film in terms of a love story, but I feel the way people are framing the film, it becomes a completely different thing. And if you look at it as something that really comes out of that first scene I showed you of the other film, of the And Life Goes On, the framing that is done in this film is much more interesting. I mean, just imagine you had all those images from Gaza, and then you take one of those little images and try to create the network and frames that are possible to actually change the content of it. No? So this is one thing. And the other thing is, I feel that Kiarostami is putting a lot of that question of feminism into it. Just remember the first scene when he does that casting. I mean, casting is always the most brutal thing on a film shoot. It's an old man, he sort of wanders among all of those girls and he's enjoying himself and talking to this one and talking to that one and then asking his assistant to take down names. And then, you know, he chooses what to do and who to choose. And I think this is very reflective of Kiarostami to think of that in the first place. If we shoot with young women or with girls, it is a very patriarchal gesture. No? So actually he's counting down that idea of how much power relation is there in a director if he is working with younger people or with women or with workers or with people that he feels in the village. Of course he likes them. And I think the filming with the children is completely different to what we've seen now. No? So that will be one thing. Then the other thing is, he also shows us ZIR-E is not allowed to wear what she would like to wear. No? The second scene. She comes up, she'd like to wear something special because now she's in film, she'll be in cinema. And then she's told, no, you should wear the traditional stuff. And it goes on to the whole film that he's showing people cannot wear what they like. They cannot move as they like. They cannot say what they want to say. They cannot express their feelings as they want to. So he's sort of counting down all the power relations in film. No? And then we always have those little counter shots. At the very beginning, I don't know if you notice this on ZIR-E, where she looks through the, now on Mrs. Shiva, not on the director, but she looks through the flowers and it's like, I'm gonna get my will. No? But you never know. So I'm quite undecided. Is this actually an analysis of how to make a film? No, is it an analysis of how films are made and how much of force is implied in doing that? No? And then obviously in that direction, the two main women characters, ZIR-E and Mrs. Shiva, they are the most of the resistance you have in that film. But they're not allowed to talk. So for me, it's very difficult to say, is this a huge construction? Like the whole film is, of course, in no way documentary, but a huge construction of how documents are made, how authenticity is produced? Or is that Kiarostami risking to be confronted with a situation like that? I'd be interested in how you saw that.
Yeah, we could throw straight to responses from the audience if there's anyone who wants to pitch in on this topic. I guess with this, the early scene you mentioned where there's kind of the casting process, what it also highlights is a certain kind of commodification of women there, that they're kind of treated like just these kind of, you know, they're all lined up for him to like pick out the favorite one or whatever. That's like,
and he's also complaining. He says you should stay in the line, and then they form like a chorus around him. It looks very strange because it looks very staged, and at the same time they sort of talk back. Yeah. Obviously they're supposed to only say their names and addresses, and then they say, hey, why? Are you going to show it? Are you going to show this film? And then the other one, that came on television and we didn't have the channel and we couldn't even see it. So there's both sides to it, actually. But the analysis is, of course, on the normal film shooting as being something very forceful and being something very denigrating for women. But you also have that other side in that film. So that's why I said the film is only interesting if you watch it as reframing and reframing and reframing the same situation from all sorts of sides. No? I don't think there's a message. I don't think that ending is... There have been many explanations. What does that ending mean? What did they say? Many people say he comes back smiling. I mean, he's tiny. There's no way to tell he's smiling, but you have, of course, that Baroque music, which sort of, after that long film, which is boring. Now, I mean, many people left. I was sitting in the back. They were, out, because nothing is happening. But this is the whole point of that thing. Nothing is happening, and then in the end you have that Baroque music and everybody feels, aha, this is an ending. But I think that sort of reflection on filming and that sort of reflection of filming in the face of death and violence and injuries and those, I mean, you do realize there was an earthquake, but you don't realize there have been 50,000 people who are, no, 35,000 who were dead, and then another 100,000 probably, who were injured.
You see the tents that are still there even years later.
You do see traces.
Rebuilt.
Yeah, no, it's true. You do see traces, but you tend to get pulled into that love story thing. Hossein wanting to marry her, but in fact, when they, because at the core you have that excerpt, that incidental, we don't know how incidental, meeting of the first director among the ruins, and then that sort of dissolves, no? And the more and more you get into it, the more and more context you see, and that's also very clever of Kiarostami. I think that he says film usually works because you cut out the context. No? And here you have all those feedback loops that are happening. I don't know if you noticed it. There is one, in that strange sort of documentary chronology, there's one flashback. You probably remember. When he's talking to the director in the car, then suddenly he remembers the scene on the cemetery. And then there's a flashback where he's walking across the cemetery, then the old lady puts him off, and then he walks back to the olive trees, and he sort of gets entangled into a film shoot again. And this is a film shoot. We don't see what is being shot. We just see the team and the crew and everybody. And this is another scene which comes from Life Goes On. So we have that time, a sort of time warp, where the one film in a flashback gets like in a Möbius strip, lost in the shooting of another film which you're going to see into. All of those things I think are interesting to ask the question, what is at the core which we can never reach of that film?
Alex, you had a question? Just wait for the microphone to come along.
Okay, it's more of a comment than a question, but I would be very interested to hear your thoughts about it, because the casting scene at the beginning, where they're supposed to stand in line and they're obviously not obeying it, really reminded me of the other film we watched here, Orderly, Disorderly, and I kind of read it as like the filmmakers trying to have this order, but the life they're trying to capture, whatever life is kind of the disorder. And the product, the film we are seeing, is like something in between. But I really was thrown back to this short film, Orderly, Disorderly, while watching it. And with all the following scenes of him saying the wrong number because it's what his number were, and all the other, responses.
No, I think it's very good. No? And in Disorderly, he's actually working that through already. But here you have that idea that the framing and the reframing and the endless reframing of that scene sort of points much more to the order that is imposed by the shot or by the camera. No? And that is much stricter here, I feel. because what is still a sort of play in orderly, disorderly, here is a matter of how do you frame traumatic situations, how do you frame violence. So that, you're completely right. I think it's an excellent observation, but this is carrying it into another field.
Thank you.
Sharon?
I just want to add to that comment because I think it's a really good point that we see in a film, the filmmakers, they try to capture this village life, and it's a life that they kind of invent also, because the scenes that we see where Mrs. Shiva tells Tawade to dress traditionally, to put something traditional on, is also, I think, also adds to that, because she is telling her, no, that's not how people dress anymore, but she insists that she should buy something traditional. And also, one scene that really stuck with me was when Hossein told Tawade on the rooftop of the house, I would never treat you, or I would never talk to you like that if we were married. I would never make a fuss about my socks or something. And I think that's something that was missing for me from the analysis of the movie, is that you have a bunch of filmmakers who come from a city, a big city, and they come to a village and they try to capture a village life, but they don't, I mean, they sort of, you know, they sort of capture it, but they also don't really listen to the people who live there.
Yeah. There's a lot of nuances that they seem to be missing out on in this attempt to recreate the scene from the village.
Yeah, I think it's a very good observation, because it's part, but I would also say it's also part of that mise en abîme, because you don't know when Hossein is talking in his own name and when he is just delivering the script of the film. So it always goes in circles. And I think what we should really be careful about is say there is something authentic. I think what the film does is deconstruct any idea of authenticity. No? Because everybody surprises us. Hossein surprises us. Those women that they put on the pickup at some point, no? I feel they are really surprising. And as you say, it is not that you have a simple hierarchy. The people from the city, the educated people, the film people, and then the masons and so on. No, the people like Hossein and even the mason seem much more clever than the really stupid director. I feel the director is really played as somebody who is a little, I mean, he's not close to dementia, but he's so, so fond of himself, walking through that space and the village and the authenticity, that you really feel he's the most reduced, not to say stupid of them all. But he's the one who sort of enjoys himself doing all those things. So but I think Kiarostami is clever enough to say we don't have the authentic village and then we have the cinematic view, but they sort of challenge each other all the time, and that makes it interesting.
I mean, one thing that leapt out at me was kind of this idea you're having about it. It's the director who's this kind of like just a stubborn mule or something, where we have the kind of issue with the number, getting the Hossein getting the number right. Like it's 65, it's not 25, and it's just like, why not just let him say 25? Why is it so important that he has to say 65? Like, because you made that number up, and like there's something unique about saying that number, but it doesn't occur to the director and just to go with it. Like he just sticks with his kind of mindset.
No, and also you can see they can change it any time. I mean, the other director forgets his lines and he just helps out.
Yeah.
No? He tells him the lines to say, so the other one repeats it. Everything is okay. I mean, it's the simple power game they're playing.
Yeah.
Do it again, do it again, do it again. Produce differences or don't. And I mean, it always has the second layer. The one is the simple director who sort of plays his force, and Kiarostami, who's behind it's the team behind the team that we get to see. He is sort of interested in producing difference and different framings, and I think this is the interesting thing. But that makes it very difficult to say what is a meaning, or what is the authentic idea, or what is truth, and how can we communicate it. And that is why I think it is important to see that film as dealing with the real and dealing with an event which you cannot put into images or sound. No?
So the event being the earthquake then is the kind of trauma that can't be represented, and it's kind of always like existing outside of the frame as this very looming presence.
And then of course you have that idea of the trauma which I said is in the first place violence, or that earthquake. But then if you turn it around, Hussein insists that the real trauma is his. No? He's born into a world. He says, I hope to found a family before I die. I mean, that is really a take on life which is shocking. No?
He's also so agonized about like not having the house that, you know, it's a sign of respectability and a sign that he's kind of like acquired a social status, and like everything comes, like he can't get married if he doesn't have the house, and he can't have the family, and so on and so on. And everything stems from this like inability to have this like possession, essentially.
That's why I said he's denying that this is it's a natural catastrophe, Naturkatastrophe. He says no, it's social. The real trauma is the social, to lose life socially. That's the trauma. Everything else can be is a matter of, actually he says everybody's equal after the earthquake, and that's my chance. There was
another question from your next. Yep.
Yeah, I was wondering about the scene where he said the number wrong, like twice. To me, it felt like he did that on purpose to have more time with her on the rooftop. And I was thinking about how much of it was real. You said that. And to me, it seemed like the scenes and how he put on his shoes and the socks, the scene progressively got better after he had these horrible, or I mean, very emotional conversations, or I mean, monologue with her. And it's a strange thing, because that too, I guess, is scripted, but still it made the rest of the actual scene better. So there's, I guess, some truth in it. That's just not a question, just a comment. Yeah.
No, but you're completely right, and I'm really thankful for you saying that, because it is not that something is scripted and then it's not true, but to say a sentence in front of a camera. And there was a camera, even if it was off camera for the other camera, to say a sentence in front of a camera changes everything. It changes yourself, it changes the whole situation, and it might also change a social situation. See, the film is about empowerment and disempowerment. And the camera is just one link in a huger feedback circle. But I think that's exactly what you were describing.
I wanted to go back a little bit also to your description of the film as like this kind of time warp or Mobius strip, because there are moments in the film where it does, particularly in the kind of like where we see the shoot taking place, where it does just seem to get stuck in this kind of, almost like a record, like needle being stuck on the same part of the record or whatever. It just goes round and round in a loop and repeats over and over again. And for the spectator too, you're wondering like, where is this going? Like, what is this? You know, what is this building to? Or like, have we got stuck in? Like, are we like?
But then we start watching and we say something is getting better. It's not the same. Every repetition is not the same. There's always a
slight variation on every scene. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah.
It's like Wiederholung und Differenz. So it's very Deleuzian. Yeah, actually.
Difference and repetition. Yeah. No, and then clearly, like there are other moments then where you get kind of like. Taken out of this kind of time loop again.
And also, if you take it from the love story side, it's the promise he's making. It's not going to get boring if we stay together, and every night is going to be very special. I mean, he actually says routine the turning around, that's, we're not going to get into a routine if you marry me. And actually it's the same argument.
I'm naive. But
that he says for the cinema. I'll make you watch the same thing over and over again and you'll see different things. That's a promise.
We had, when we were talking about Where is the Friend's House, we also were discussing the kind of nods to film genres in the film. The nods to certain film genres, like the kind of, there's a kind of nod to the horror film or to the thriller film in that work. I mean, here we seem to have this kind of nod to the romantic comedy as a film genre. But also this sense of like, well, what's the border between kind of like romance and just pure harassment in the film? Like,
I think but I think so. You could link it to romance, but I mean, it's also Nuit Américaine, so it's also Truffaut.
Yeah.
That idea of film in the film, and that's been very en vogue in the 60s. And it's always been about the force of the directors. No? There was always the issue with those films on the shoot. On the one hand, you have a love story. On the other side, you have somebody trying to play God. And then he subsumes to that whole thing. And is the last one to survive.
What this film does that it's interesting, I guess, in terms of like thinking of like those kind of self-reflexive films as almost like a genre of cinema. It's Truffaut or Le Mépris by Godard or 2 Weeks in Another Town. Or, I mean, Hollywood was full of these kind of Singing in the Rain and so on and so forth. Kiarostami kind of goes one step further in this because, we get we have like this kind of we have this multiplication of director figures of films and films and films where we get a director directing a director in a scene, and then obviously we still have Kiarostami like directing the director.
Like Truffaut is in the image.
Yeah, exactly.
In the American 90s in the image. Kiarostami, as far as we know, didn't appear. I mean,
he waits until Taste of Cherry really to make his own appearance, doesn't he? It's just like the kind of fourth level of multiplication in the film. Goldberg was also actually saying that Kiarostami, I mean, critics have often kind of dubbed these films the Coco trilogy, from Where is the Friend's House to Through the Olive Trees, but that Kiarostami himself really sees And Life Goes On, Through the Olive Trees, and Taste of Cherry as the kind of more apt trilogy, let's say, in terms of like his filmmaking technique. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, like how we could think of those three films as a alternative kind of constellation to think of together.
It's probably a way of viewing it. I think it's a good idea to take these together because you have, as you were mentioning, you have that difference between the people who come from the outside, but who are mostly then, who have also been from the inside, as Kiarostami is from the Coca region. And then he goes to Tehran and then he goes back. So it's not a simple two-sided thing, but there is movement in that. And I think that idea of looking at the interest people might have in that authenticity of village life, at the same time missing it. I mean, in the Taste of Cherry is the one in the car too. Yeah. Okay.
The car actually.
Now I mixed it up with
the car actually unites this film with Taste of Cherry because it's basically the same car, right? The kind of white Range Rover. And there's also those kind of the movements of the cars unite the films as well.
It is, and then there's also that idea of confession. No? The confessions are made in the car, strangely, very often in those films, because the car is like a very small location and movable. So you have the people together, nobody can go away, the camera's fixed, and then long conversations can take place, and still you have interesting images because the car is in the landscape. I think that's very typical for Kiarostami, but also for Panahi, who's actually shooting in the city. You always have those very close things. And also, of course, because, but I only know that, of course, from Goldbach and Matthias and others, because we were talking about that the idea in the post-revolutionary Iran, the car is something in between the public and the private. So in the car, you sort of, it's not like in a house where you have certain rules, things you can say, dress or take off the scarf. But in the car, it's sort of an in-between space where things can be negotiated. And that probably also links those films. Because there's no cars in where's the friend's house. No? It's always the running in the zigzagged roads, which you also have here. And on the other one, I don't remember. Never mind. You have those zigzag roads, and they are interesting because those paths in themselves, they are sort of cultural memories. It's the memories of ways people would take the time they needed to get from one village to the next, and the car is ruining that a bit. And that is also an issue here. When she says, I need to go that way, and then the mason says, no, you can't. And then it's on foot. You can take other paths. You can go across the olive trees. In a car, you can't. You stay with the main road.
Maybe time for one last question from the audience, if anyone is interested in speaking up. We can also let you go if that's your preference. It is. How are we doing for time? Oh yeah, we're right at 11:30, so it's probably a nice time to wrap it up. Well, thank you very much, Ute, for a great discussion of the film. We'll be taking a bit of a break from Kiarostami in alignment with the semester break, and we'll be back on May 7th, I believe, with Mariam Goban Karimi talking to us about 10. So we're kind of moving into the 2000s with that film. So, you know, we'll take it easy for a couple of months, and then we'll be back and continue part 2 of our Kiarostami series. But thank you, Ute.
Thank you very much for having me.